The road to Carrig Rua narrowed with every passing mile, until the hedgerows leaned in so close Maeve Kilkenny had to slow to a crawl, afraid her rental car might lose a mirror to the brambles. Overhead, slate-grey clouds gathered like gossiping widows, heavy with secrets and rain. The GPS signal had given out an hour ago, somewhere near Kilkenny, and now the only sign she was going the right way was an aging wooden marker nailed askew to a crooked post. Fealty go Carrig Rua. She pulled over when she saw it, climbed out, and took a photograph. Her notebook, resting on the passenger seat, was already half filled with scribbled notes and snippets of old stories from various parishes. But this place, Carrig Rua, was different. More than just another name on her grant-funded folklore tour, it was the place where her life had split in two, before the crash and after. Maeve had been 6 years old when her parents' car flew off the road and tumbled down the side of Cnoc Dearg, the blood-red hill that loomed behind the village like a sentinel. Only she survived. It was never explained how she'd made it out with barely a scratch. No one could tell her how she'd wandered barefoot, in her pajamas, nearly a kilometre away from the wreck, muttering about birds that weren't birds and a wind that whispered. That was 26 years ago. Now she was an ethnographer, finishing her PhD on dying oral traditions, and something, guilt, instinct, or something older, had pulled her back to the place she'd promised never to return. Carrig Rua had aged without grace. The buildings slumped with rot and resignation. Stone walls were broken in places, giving way to thick, wild gorse. There was no pub anymore, no shop, and only a few stubborn homes with lights glowing faintly in the early dusk. Her grandmother's cottage sat at the edge of the village, exactly as she remembered it, a squat grey thing with moss between the thatch and ivy on the stones. The windows had been boarded for years, but the heavy wood door still groaned in the same familiar way as it opened. Dust greeted her first, then the cool, damp breath of the cottage, as if the building had been holding it in all this time. She lit a turf fire using the bundle she'd brought with her and sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the flames struggle. The silence in the room was thick, almost expectant. Maeve flipped open her notebook. She'd begin tomorrow by visiting the remaining villagers, starting with Eamon O'Shea, the former gravedigger, who was reputed to know every tale, every shadow. That night, though exhausted from the drive, she couldn't sleep. The wind began just after midnight, faint but persistent, a long sighing sound against the stone, weaving through the eaves, rattling the boards of the shutters like skeletal fingers. She buried her head beneath the blanket but couldn't ignore it, not when the sound changed. Became words. At first, she told herself it was the fire crackling, or a fox out in the fields. But then the wind carried a sound more distinct. A voice. Soft. Familiar. Maeve. She sat up, heart hammering. The voice came again. From the western side of the house. She looked toward the shuttered window. The west window. She crept across the room, bare feet cold against the stone floor, and examined the old latch. It was rusted but shut tight. Beside it, tucked in the frame, she noticed a yellowing prayer card wedged behind a beam. Curious, she slid it out and turned it over. Scrawled in fading blue ink were words in her grandmother's handwriting. Shut the west at sundown. Do not open, no matter the whisper. She stared at the note for a long time, then slowly looked back at the window. The voice was gone, but the wind had shifted, and somewhere above the red hill behind her, the air carried a faint rustle, not unlike the flapping of wings. The next morning, Maeve woke to a chill in her bones and the dying scent of turf ash. The fire had burned low in the night. She wrapped herself in a wool cardigan and stepped outside. The mist had rolled in thick, clinging to the fields like a held breath. Only the tip of Cnoc Dearg rose above it, red as ever, stained by centuries of iron-rich clay. She made her way to Eamon O'Shea's house, a modest cottage near the bog path, the same way she remembered from childhood, though the path now seemed narrower, hemmed in by tall nettles and whispering reeds. Eamon answered the door with a slow blink and a grunt. He was older than she expected, nearly 90, though his eyes were sharp and blue as sea glass. "You're Maggie's granddaughter," he said before she even spoke. "Yes, Maeve. I'm recording stories, local folklore for the university. I know what you're doing." He stepped aside. "But some stories won't stay buried." Inside, his home was a maze of stacked books and mildewed tapestries. An old peat stove rattled in the corner. Maeve sat across from him, recording device ready. "You came back to where it happened," Eamon said, staring at her rather than her recorder. Maeve frowned. "The crash." He nodded once, slowly. "Cnoc Dearg doesn't let go easy. The wind there ain't wind. It's a warning." Maeve hesitated. "You believe in the slough?" His eyes narrowed. "They're real. Leastways, as real as curses and grief. The slough are the unforgiven dead. Spirits so wicked, the earth spat them out. They move like birds at dusk, looking for souls to steal. And they don't knock. They whisper." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your Dawes car went off the road the night the west wind screamed louder than ever. Some say it wasn't the brakes or the rain. Some say something took the wheel." Maeve felt her breath catch. "I was 6. I said I heard wings. I thought it was a dream. It weren't no dream. Your gran knew. That's why she boarded the west window. That's why she wrote the prayer." Eamon stared hard at her. "Don't open that window, Maeve. No matter what you hear. The slough. They remember you." She left Eamon's house shaken. The mist hadn't lifted. If anything, it thickened. She wandered the bog path to clear her head. The reeds swayed with no wind. Birds remained eerily silent. There was only the squelch of her boots in the peat. Then, in the distance, something moved. She stopped. Among the fog, a shadow hovered, long-limbed, slightly hunched. It turned and vanished into the mist. Maeve backed away, pulse racing. She told herself it was a trick of the fog, her nerves. Yet when she returned to the cottage, the air inside felt wrong. Heavier. She checked the west window again. Still latched. Still rusted shut. But on the inside of the glass, 4 long smears, as though something had dragged its fingers across the pane. From the inside. The next few days passed in a haze of unease. Maeve interviewed 3 more villagers, what was left of them. Most were polite but guarded, their stories clipped, carefully rehearsed. They spoke of fairies and banshees and changelings, of old burial mounds and cursed stones. But when she asked directly about the slough, the mood always shifted. "They don't belong in stories," said Bridget Keane, a white-haired woman with sharp eyes. "They don't like being named." Even her recorder had begun to act strangely. One night, playing back an interview, Maeve heard a faint murmur beneath the voice, like wind howling far away, or whispers between static. When she rewound it, the sound was gone. Sleep became elusive. The whispering wind returned each night, always after sundown, always from the west-facing window. Once, it called her name so softly she almost didn't hear it. Another time it said, "You left us." That voice wasn't her mother's or father's. It was something older. One morning she found the latch on the west window hanging loose, though she was certain it had been locked the night before. She pushed it shut and hammered a nail into the frame. Still, the air inside felt violated, like something had passed through, or hovered outside for too long. She tried to rationalize it all. Isolation. Suggestion. A childhood trauma revisited. She was a scientist, not a believer. But the unease was mounting. Something wasn't right with the hill. That afternoon, determined to confront whatever haunted her, Maeve hiked to Cnoc Dearg. The climb was steeper than she remembered. The path was nearly gone, overtaken by thorny gorse and deep, wet heather. Her boots squelched in the soaked ground as she reached the midpoint, where the view of the village lay hazy in the sun. Wind pulled at her coat and hair, not violently but insistently. Halfway up, she found it. A small ring of stones, half collapsed, overgrown with moss. In the center, a hollow, a depression in the earth, dark and round, as if something had burrowed outward. Her stomach turned. Nearby, scraps of rusted metal poked out from the brambles. She pushed them aside and gasped. It was the twisted remains of a bumper from a decades-old car. She was standing at the crash site. The memories came back in a flood. The rain, the screaming, her mother's arm stretched protectively in front of her, the windshield shattering. Then, silence, a void, and from that silence, a sound, a wind that spoke. No, sang. Maeve stumbled backward, breath ragged. Above her, the clouds darkened unnaturally fast. The temperature dropped. A flock of birds, too large, too fast, shot overhead in a blur. She ducked instinctively as they passed, their shapes twisting in mid-air, not quite avian. The wind rose, howling through the gorse. And then, from all around her, a chorus of whispers. "You remember." She bolted down the hill, slipping on moss and tearing her palms on bramble. The whispers followed her, rising in pitch, becoming a cacophony of hisses and mournful voices, voices that knew her name. She didn't stop running until she was inside the cottage, door slammed shut and bolted. Everything was quiet again. Maeve leaned against the door, shaking. Then she heard it. A soft knock. She turned. It came from the west-facing window. Not pounding, not urgent, just deliberate. Knock, knock. She stepped forward, heart hammering, unsure if she was dreaming. There, on the other side of the glass, something moved. A face, too pale, too long, sunken black eyes that seemed to smile. And a voice, almost kind. "We never left." Maeve screamed and fell back. But when she looked again, the window was empty. The latch still held. The nail was in place. She stayed up all night, lights blazing, and in the morning she found feathers on the floor. Thin, black ones, wet with dew. Maeve didn't sleep that night. Not a second. She sat rigid in the kitchen chair, the fireplace throwing long, flickering shadows across the room, her eyes never leaving the western wall. The latch remained shut, the nail untouched. Yet she swore, she'd seen something looking in. Not a hallucination, not a trick of wind or shadow. A face, human, but not. The black feathers still lay on the floor, glistening slightly in the low light. She'd touched one, gingerly. It was warm. In the morning, the sun came late, hiding behind a wall of thick grey sky. Outside, the fog had swallowed the village whole. From the door, Maeve couldn't see past the front gate. The hill behind was gone, a red ghost hidden by mist. She had to leave. She packed her things quickly, stuffing clothes and notebooks into her bag, breathing hard. The cottage seemed to watch her. Every groan of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the chimney flue, made her flinch. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her car keys. She turned the handle of the front door, and froze. The outside knob was wet. Not with rain, but something stickier. Her hand came away dark. A smear of black, not unlike ink, streaked across her palm. She stepped outside anyway, bag slung over her shoulder. The fog swallowed her instantly. When she reached the car, she saw it. Scratches across the windshield. Dozens of them, thin and deep, crisscrossing like claw marks. Her breath caught. On the hood lay a small object. Another feather. She opened the door, shoved her bag inside, and climbed in. The engine turned, once, twice, then died. She tried again. Nothing. The third time, the car started. Maeve threw it into gear and peeled down the gravel road toward the village's only exit, tires kicking up mist and pebbles. As she rounded the bend near Eamon's cottage, she instinctively looked toward it, and slammed on the brakes. His front door was wide open. The windows, too. Curtains fluttered like flags. And Eamon stood in the yard, staring straight at her, arms raised, mouth agape in a silent scream. Before she could react, the fog swallowed him. Gone. She sat frozen, hand trembling on the gear shift. Then the radio clicked on. White noise. She hadn't turned it on. Aive. Her name. Garbled. Repeated again and again, warped by static. Join us. Maeve screamed, reached down, and yanked the radio cables out from the dash. Silence. She hit the gas. The road stretched ahead, barely visible in the mist. She turned corners she didn't remember, past trees that hadn't been there before. No matter how far she drove, the landscape refused to change. A dead hare in the road. Then another. Then 3 crows, wings mangled, lying in a perfect triangle. She stopped. Something was wrong. Maeve opened her notebook and found the prayer card from her grandmother tucked between the pages. Her hands shook as she read the scrawl again. Shut the west at sundown. Do not open, no matter the whisper. Something clicked in her mind. The slough weren't haunting Carrigrua. They were trapped by it, bound to its ancient ground, to Cnoc Dearg. That's why the stories were forgotten, why no one left, why the village had to die, and why they wanted her. Because she'd escaped once. She could bring them out. Maeve looked up. The road ahead was gone. The car had stopped. Outside, the fog thinned, and standing before her, not 5 meters from the hood, were silhouettes. Tall, thin, slightly hunched. Human at first glance, but wrong. Limbs too long, heads cocked at unnatural angles. Wings. Folded behind them like shadows. They didn't move. But Maeve heard them. From all sides. From the trees. From the air. The wind rose. Whispers surrounded her. She fumbled with the door, stumbled out, clutching the prayer card like a talisman. She ran, not knowing where, just away. Through the bog. Up the hill. To the hollow at the heart of Cnoc Dearg. And she screamed into the mist. You can't have me. The wind howled louder. The voices screamed. But something shifted. She threw the prayer card into the hollow. The hill groaned. Then silence. Total, perfect silence. And just like that, the fog began to clear. 3 weeks later, the rescue team found her wandering near the Kilshenny crossroads. She couldn't remember how she got there. The doctors said she was in shock, dehydrated, suffering from exposure. The villagers, they swore Carrigrua had been abandoned for years. No one had lived there in decades. Maeve recovered slowly. But one thing never changed. Every night, as the sun sets, she checks the windows, especially the one that faces west. And she never opens it. No matter what she hears,